I mean, if I were to, in hindsight, describe it, it looked like an 8-foot gorilla with a man's face. And it walked over the snow berm, took about 5 steps directly in front of me. It turns around, it stares directly at me, and it turned right back around, and it walked back down to the creek bed.
Every damn time I try to take a nice quiet hike, there's always some human around to harsh my mellow. But that's all right. It's February, and that means it's Sasquatch season. This month, Through a Glass, Darkly will be going deep on all things Sasquatch. So sit down, tiny human, and watch. Otherwise, I will eat you.
I love Sasquatch season. You're not going to want to miss it all this month on Through a Glass Darkly.
Welcome. I'm here with Chris Kramer. Chris, welcome, my friend.
Good to be here, Sean. This ought to be interesting.
Yeah, I think we spent like an hour and 15 minutes fighting through Microsoft Windows. Yeah, I won't comment on Microsoft.
That was a bit of a challenge.
But we basically gave up on Microsoft entirely and just used Samsung, and it worked kind of on the first go. So
thank goodness, right?
Android.
Jesus, that was painful.
Yeah. It's all right. We just worked the problem, which we did. We got through it. All right. And a completely wild shift. Sasquatch. How the hell did you get into this topic? What did you do before that? Just high level, just to like ground people.
Okay. So I was a kid when this thing kicked off for me. I grew up outside of Philadelphia. We had that conversation because we're both kind of from the same general area. And so it's easier for me to start how I got into this to flesh out anything before that, you know.
By the way, what county did you live? Was it Delaware County or is it?
I lived both in
nearby?
Delaware County and Montgomery County. So I grew up on the main line, and then I moved in with my grandmother in the west end of Chester when I was a teenager. So I went from riches to rags.
I forgot that you lived in Chester. Okay, yeah, but if people don't if people don't know the area, but if they know the area, they know.
Yeah.
They
Chester's a little rough, man. But my family had been there since the lace mill days back in the day. So I had a lot of roots there, and all through that area too, all the way down into Wilmington, quite frankly. So,
yeah. All right, so you're from that area, and then roughly, what did you do for a living before?
So
not even before, because you were a child. So, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, this started before any type of real career had taken off for me in my life, So back in the early 90s, I was kind of a vagabond, man. I worked in the restaurant industry as just a mercenary chef. And so I had wound up, and I was living in a town called Prescott, Wisconsin, which is right where the Mississippi meets the St. Croix River on the Minnesota border. And I'm working out there, and I had made friends with a guy that was a huge hunter, gun guy, outdoor enthusiast. And I was always an outdoor guy. And so he invited me to go hunting with him. And I'd never been hunting. I mean, where I grew up, that was not part of our culture. You know what I mean? But I was super interested in it. And obviously, when you're out in the Midwest and you're in kind of the more rural areas, it's part of the zeitgeist of what they do, And so I went and got my license. And so we headed out to a place that's fairly well known in kind of southwestern, almost central Wisconsin, known as the Wisconsin Dells. And it's a huge outdoor wilderness area. And his family had property up there for a few generations. So you head out to where they hunt, right? And I mean, it's cold right around Thanksgiving. There's snow on the ground, and he puts me in a tree stand. And this is literally my first time I'd ever held a rifle and done anything of this nature, right? And he says, listen, so I mean, this bottom of the...
How old were you at the time?
I was 25 years old. So this was 33 years ago. So he puts me in this stand. So it's at the bottom of a ravine with a big hill to the one side. And then to my right, there's kind of like a berm that travels horizontal next to me. And then it drops down probably about 30 feet down to a creek bed that was also running kind of perpendicular to the stand. He goes, listen, I'm going to go up to this hill and I'm going to take a wide path around and I'm going to try and beat if there's any deer down in front of you and see if you can get a shot of as if it would walk in front of where the tree stand was. So he takes off and I'm sitting there in the stand, with a rifle in my hand and, it's cold and I'm not in my comfort zone for sure, but, it's cool. And probably about an hour goes by and I hear grunting noises in front of me. And so I'm looking up to the hill, but I don't see anything. And then I realize they're coming from the creek bed that's to my right. And this is what happened. So I watched about maybe 30 or 40 yards in front of me. I watched what at the time I thought was like a guy in a black hoodie come up over the snow berm. And he just keeps coming. It wasn't a guy in a black hoodie, right? And I watched this thing. I mean, if I were to, in hindsight, describe it, it looked like an 8-foot gorilla with a man's face. And it walked over the snow berm, took about 5 steps directly in front of me. It turns around, it stares directly at me, and it turned right back around, and it walked back down to the creek bed. And I got a good 10, 15 second kind of visual capture of it, right? And
how big was it? Like, how tall?
It was, I mean, if I were to guess, it was easily between 7.5 and 8 feet tall. It was massive, massive black hair. I mean, just, thick chest, thick legs, thick arms. And I mean, it's really big. And it was, I've said this, I've told this story a few times, obviously, but, like hindsight being 2020, I just remember just being in absolute just shock and disbelief from it. And probably 45 minutes later, my friend came down from the hill. And I'm in my brain, I'm thinking, if I tell this guy,
take away your gun.
Right? And so
that's interesting. Let me have that rifle, please. Thank you.
Yeah. So finally I say to him, I said, Tim, I got to ask you, and I told him what I saw. And his response was he looked at me and he said, oh, so you saw him then, did you?
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
Right? And that was like, wait, what? And so I obviously...
So he saw him too?
A lot of conversation ensued. He has never seen it. He had never seen it, but it was a kind of in his family's lore for a couple of generations. His grandfather used to call him like the wild man of the hills. His uncle had seen it. So he was fully aware of what I was talking about. And, that was the ground zero for me. That kicked off an interest in the topic. And I've been around it in some form, sometimes deeper, sometimes less, ever since. And that was where it all started for me,
Going back to that incident, when he was approaching you, or did you get a sense male or female?
I would say it was male. It was 30 yards in front of me, so it was fairly close. Like I said, it had the body and kind of the hair, it would look like a primate, right? But facially, it looked like just a more pronounced, bigger version of a human. That's what it looked like. It looked much more of a human face, and it looked like it had intelligence, I could see its eyes. It didn't menace me. You know what I mean? But it was, the whole thing was menacing unto itself, but it didn't look like it was aggressive. If I were to describe it, it looked irritated, and then it just turned around and it went back from where it came. And so, yeah.
When it was approaching you, did you get the sense that it knew you were there, or was it surprised when it saw you?
No, it turned around like it came over the hill. It walked a few steps, and then it just, because it was in profile when it came up, and then it turned and faced me, and it looked literally right in my eyes. It knew I was there. So, and I've heard so much of that where, you've heard hunters up in BC that were, hundreds of yards out, with a scope, and these guys would turn around and stare right through the scope at them, like for whatever reason, they seem to be able to detect that. So, yeah.
And what was your state? Were you scared? Were you eerily calm?
I wouldn't say I was calm. I think I was frozen. The last I'd heard, there was no such thing as a 8-foot gorilla-looking creature running around in the wilds of Wisconsin. So, I played that scenario back in my head multiple times. I don't think I was in like this frozen, terrified state. I think I was just more in shock, and
disbelief.
Yeah. I mean, it was just something that was so, at the time, like the last thing some kid from Philly is going to be thinking of when he gets out into that situation is that's going to happen. So, that's probably more of my state of mind. Just shock.
Did it leave any physical evidence, like footprints?
So I went to show Tim where this thing walked up from, and there was no physical sign that it had ever been there. When I'm looking at it, it was trudging through the snow from what I could see, but there wasn't tracks up from the creek, nor were there tracks back down from the creek. It would just had never happened, which that is what it is. And that's fairly common in the Sasquatch phenomenon, actually.
Any smell, scent?
No. Obviously, we hear those stories about the skunk apes in Florida, or oftentimes not, they're accompanied by many people describe it as a putrid, horrifying smell. I didn't detect. I've never smelled that. That's not been not that it doesn't happen, but not my experience,
Like, was it windy? And if it was windy, was it downwind from you, upwind from you?
I would say it was upwind from me, because I'm fairly certain that's how this hunting situation had been set up in the first place, so that scent wouldn't be caught. But, that's conjecture, because I really don't recall, that I don't think I was, if I was, it was picking up my scent. I never really thought of that, actually, but, that's very possible as well.
What about, I guess, other visual cues? You said it was cold. Could you see its breath?
I don't recall seeing its breath. I really don't. I don't think.
Could you see your own breath? Like, was it that cold?
Yeah, I'm sure that I could see my own breath. It was probably in the mid-20s. So, that was
yeah, you could definitely see breath at that.
A pretty good indicator, but I don't recall looking for that, obviously. I wasn't trying to be methodically discerning the situation when it was going on.
Exactly how many hairs did it have on its body?
Thank you. Yeah.
20,475, or was it?
Yeah, you're close.
Sounds about right. That sounds accurate. And then, were there any other animals? Well, actually, when this encounter happens, what was the ambient noise like before that? Could you hear birds?
It was quiet. But again, it was also the time of year where there wouldn't have been a lot of maybe more animal activity than there would be in the spring. I didn't hear birds, but it was, if I think back on it, it was, I won't say it was trying to set the ambience as ominously silent, but it was quiet. You could hear yourself walking. I could hear noises because of that silence. I heard the grunting, and I heard and moving around. You know what I mean? So yeah, there's that, but I don't recall it being one of those, and all of a sudden it got deathly silent. That wasn't where my head wasn't.
No Oz factor, at least that you can recall.
Not at this point. I've seen that, but not at this time.
Okay, and did you get the sense that he knew you were there initially and was walking toward you, or?
No, I don't think he realized I was there until he came up over the edge of the hill. I really don't. I think, but he spun around. He snapped right around towards me. So he picked up whatever that energy that he was picking up really quickly. He knew I was there once he got up there, And in all fairness, I've heard he was coming up from basically running water. I don't recall if it was frozen or not, but there's so many encounters that happen by creeks and rivers. And, there's a lot of theory that perhaps running water or whatever that is, if you're going to catch one of these guys by surprise, that's probably the place to do it, So not that was my obviously motive or intent for being there.
Right. I mean, it could be it's running water, and that's where all sorts of animals and things like that would congregate.
Exactly.
Or it could be, and we'll get into this kind of in the next episode, or it could be there's some sort of electromagnetic phenomena that generates these things, right?
I
Where you have
think
running water. If there's minerals in the water, you have current, right hand rule, that sort of thing. Electromagnetic
absolutely.
radiation.
I think we've seen that in other kind of lateral phenomenon as being a profile point, for lack of a better description. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you have this event. By the way, I don't know why this reminded me of the Army, but in the Army, I think it's been so many years since we used to have this procedure for if somebody gasses you, right? After you put on your mask and all that stuff and you get the all clear, there's usually on a tank, there's usually one person that has to break the seal first.
Right.
And it's typically the loader. And the first part of the procedure was like, hey, John, let me have your sidearm. And you take his sidearm, and then you say, okay, break the seal. And then he takes his mask off, and everybody waits to see if he dies. And if he doesn't die, then it's all clear. But I remember that very clearly. Let me have your sidearm, buddy. So, okay, so your friend kind of just says you saw him without even, you didn't even say anything. You could just tell from your, like, how did that happen?
No, I asked him, I told him what I saw. And I said, his name was Tim. And I said, Tim, I got to ask you, have you ever seen anything? And I explained to him what I saw. And, his response was not one of, anything other than
a rifle.
Right. I mean, eyebrows up, but he was very familiar with the story because it wasn't the first time he'd heard it, specifically within his own family. So, yeah. And I don't think he was super into the topic, but he had, enough backstory and knowledge of that area and his family in that area and what they had witnessed over generations to be probably more open to it. And told me what he knew, right? And that was it. And it wasn't much. It was just that this had been something that had been witnessed in his family through his father's brother, and his grandfather had talked about it. And it was kind of like post-hunt fireplace conversation. You know what I mean? For them, I would imagine.
What did they call it?
Grandfather referred to it, I'm paraphrasing, but the wild man of the hills. And that was what they called it. You know what I mean? And it was something that had been witnessed multiple times over the course of, like I said, probably 50 years, 60 years.
Okay, so this event happens. Then what?
This is back in the early 90s, right? And, it was obviously before the internet and the digital age had blossomed. There was no such thing as Google, Wikipedia, YouTube, podcasting. I think people go in multiple directions when in any one of these phenomenon, they can either try and apply some sort of human logic to whatever they saw and justify it mentally as something else and something, that's from, it was a bear or things like that. And then, or they try and are traumatized from things like that because it upsets their natural paradigm, their belief systems, and they try and divest it from their heads. Or maybe they do what I did, which was it just opened up a Pandora's box of inquiry for me. And I'm sure I had seen things like the Patterson Gimlet footage when I was younger, but I didn't have any knowledge or interest in this specific topic. And that all changed because I just started to try and learn more. And, there was very little back then. I mean, there was, you had a couple movies like maybe The Legend of Boggy Creek, or maybe a few topics that touched on this, in the library, but probably, and there wasn't the ability to connect with others like there is now. And it probably took another 5 or 6 years before things started to grow digitally. And I would say by the early 2000s, I started to make connections with others, other experiencers. There was more of a ability to access information, obviously, with the blossoming of the digital age and the blossoming of the internet. And that was when I really started, at the meantime, I moved back to New England. I get married. I work for the state. I'm raising kids, all that stuff, but it was always a super deep interest for me. And in the early 2000s, I started to make connections and I started to find other researchers. And that was probably one of the many blessings and curses of the internet. Was one of the blessings was to be able to connect with others, and so I started to make connections with some phenomenal people, like all over the country, really, and internationally in some ways. And I was able to take a much deeper dive. I started to head back out into the wilderness, and I started to just like literally, nobody's had an original thought in any of this stuff for a long time. We're all of us emulated somebody else that came before, and that's the truth. So I started doing that. I started emulating some people that looked like they were having some degrees of success with provoking responses, heading out and trying some of the methodology that I had witnessed from others doing that I learned from, and I've had the opportunity to, over the course of this thing, meet some of the greatest researchers, and I know them, researchers and experiencers involved with this, and I was able to pick up a lot of great tips, you know what I mean? And so I started going out into wilderness preserves in New England, and I started to do things like the gifting stuff, you know what I mean? And so I
actually explain it, because my audience is the only episodes that I've featured on kind of this topic have been from like an academic perspective, so not from an experiencer perspective. So it would be helpful. Explain what gifting is, even though most
the
people
gifting stuff, many people, and I can't recall where I started picking that up. I started going out into the woods because I was looking for the structure phenomenon that goes on in this thing, where it appears that they're building. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Where you find the traditional X's or a teepee in the middle of the woods, or just things that make, it's not the Cub Scouts. It is what it is, and you start to realize that there's, that didn't happen naturally. And there's something else happening here that seems to be related to this. And from that, like finding those areas, and I had found a lot of them, and stuff that was.
Did you ever find like stairwells in the middle of the woods? Like
No.
Okay.
I've heard enough of that on creepypasta, man. I've never seen that, but I've seen a lot of other bizarre things over the course of this. So,
like what? Just really quick. I don't mean to take you off track, but I'm curious.
I will dive into that with you as I progress more into my story, because it's got to be kind of told in and not to blow you off. That's further down the road for me.
Okay.
But at this time, though, what we're talking about with the gifting, I'd seen people that would leave things out in these locations and they'd be taken. And so I started doing that. I was out in this nature preserve and I had found a whole bunch of anomalies and structural things in the woods there. And there was this huge boulder, off trail. And it was in the middle of these structures. And so I left some food on this boulder. And I'm probably the only person that had been to this spot in 100 years. This was really out there. You know what I mean? It was,
When you said structures around the boulders, what do you mean by that? Structures?
Okay. So there was some of these woven, almost like natural teepees. 3 of them within a 20-yard radius of this thing. And they're not with cut ends. They were literally just pulled together. And
Were you by yourself when you found those things?
Oh, yeah. I was 100%. I mean, back in the States, I didn't go out anywhere without a video camera. I have all of this stuff documented over there. This is for a long time. I got hard drives of this stuff. So,
do you actually have a picture of this? These structures?
Of this specific one, I have a picture of the rock. And I've got hundreds of structure pictures and on this phone as well. Yeah, I'll send you stuff if you want to see it, John. I don't really share a lot of it anymore. That's another whole story, but I'm not I'm reticent to do it. I'd be happy to.
Well, I mean, the reason I ask is if you share it with me, if I could share it with the audience. If not, for the
Like
reasons.
we can. I don't know if we could pull it
Yeah.
off while we're doing this live, but I'd be happy to send
No,
you a few
no,
different things that I have.
I'll just edit it in. I'll just edit it in, brother.
I'll send you whatever we end up talking about. If there's any visual
Yeah.
support to it, I'll be happy to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah, no problem. So I leave. This is going to sound stupid because of the commercial, but this is way before the Jack Links. I left this really good beef jerky on this rock, right? And I weighted it down with a rock and I left. And the next day, I hiked all the way back out to this spot and it was gone. And right next to the rock was a quartz arrowhead that was left right there. So I provoked a response from something that, and I, the odds, I've said this before, of it being some homeless guy in the middle of nowhere, like leaving me a worked quartz arrowhead for giving a beef jerky. That wasn't what was happening there. This was something else.
Were there lots of quartz deposits in that area?
This was well forested.
Mm-hmm.
So just like most of north central New England, it's rocky and boulderous. And I mean, I used to say I got to go out and mow my rocks now when I lived there. So that's fairly a common feature all through New England. You know what I mean? And where this was a bouldery, rocky, forested area, with a lot of old school kind of, geological things going on. You know what I mean? A lot of big boulders and a lot of, whatever that looks like. So that was fairly common. Especially where I was, it's hilly.
Quartz is basically has silicon in it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, we literally use it for semiconductors because it retains information.
I see where you're going with this.
Well, look, I don't have a dog in the fight, so I just I explore all this stuff, right?
There's absolutely, and I mean, we mentioned earlier that there's a lot of conductive phenomenon that may or may not have application to the Sasquatch stuff, so some of the energy.
All right, so this is New England. You do the gifting where you just put beef jerky.
Exactly.
You have an arrowhead there.
Right. And so it wasn't too long after that. So I started going back to this spot frequently because I was intrigued by it. And I had a very brief sighting right within a 50-yard radius of this rock, probably a couple of weeks after that. Actually, I have somewhere on this, I think on this phone, I have a stash somewhere. I caught a brief, really, like most pictures of you see of these things, visual capture this thing, like half of it behind a tree. And it was a red-haired, smaller one of these guys, So I had the gifting thing continue at this spot. And, I had the same type of thing. They would take it. I was never left anything again, for leaving them something ever before. But there was something, the gifting stuff was something that carried on with me for a long time. When I would go, I've had the opportunity to do this all over the country. And it was a common practice when we were researching a little bit more traditionally than we probably do now, so yeah.
Okay, so where was this forest in New England? What's it called?
So I lived on the Connecticut, Rhode Island line, and it was a place called the Bradner Preserve, which kind of crossed the state border. Part of it was in Rhode Island and part of it was in eastern Connecticut, which is a huge pine deciduous forest all through there. You don't think of Rhode Island as being anything but a little blip on the map, but the southern half of Rhode Island is very rural, and it transitions all the way into Connecticut, which is also very forested and rural. It's right near, like many of these places. It's like where I was researching was near the Narragansett Indian Reservation, and across the border was the Pequot, Eastern and Western Pequot reservations, which is where Foxwoods Casino, if you're familiar, was. That's kind of their home base,
Okay, so you repeatedly went back. You saw kind of a brief glimpse of something.
I did.
Can you kind of go through that?
Yeah, I was like many of us, especially early on. I mean, I had a great little video camera. This is before there was Bluetooth ready, but it was still effective. And so back in those days, I would take video of areas where I was walking and researching, pan around it, zoom in on shadowy areas, whatever. And then I would go back and I would go through the film, you know what I mean? And I would timestamp segments of it that I thought, and then, take stills of it, you know what I mean? And so I would love to say that I visually saw this thing live, but I didn't. And that's common, for some reason I've noticed, and this is fairly common in this, like, the camera seems to pick up, and I'm not talking about like pareidolia things, but I mean, the camera seems to pick up things that the naked eye seems to be maybe obfuscated from for whatever reason, whether there's some energy that any of these beings is putting out or whatever causes that. You know what I mean? I think that's open for conjecture and a lot of speculation, but it's a thing, right? And so I timestamped this thing right by where I was doing the gifting. And, I don't think for the most part, these guys allow themselves to be seen unless they choose to. And that goes for even with the camera timestamping phenomenon. That seems to be, I don't think that they can't be tricked. I think they can. I think my first encounter was just a happenstance. But I've also noticed that very few, especially researchers and people that have that initial encounter, it seems to follow them for the rest of their lives. It certainly has me. Like I've probably had a handful of visual personal sightings in my life, plus all kinds of other things that went with it too. You know what I mean? So you hear so many different theories about this. Oh, you're tagged. That's the tagging phenomenon. You know what I mean? I don't know that that's true or not. I really don't know. But there does seem to be a commonality of people that have, once they've had these initial encounters, that have other ones as well. And I think I fall into that category. Whether I'm tagged or not, I don't know.
Is there anything more behind the tagged label? Like, is it just a catch-all, or are there like specific?
We're going into conjecture. So, okay, Let me preface this answer by saying one thing. As long as I've been around this thing, there's very few things that I will say, I know this. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I know that they're real. I know that they seem to be able to do some things that I can't do. And I know that those are the two things I know with a surety. And so, we're taking educated guesses through data collection and comparative experiences, right? That's where the real research, the real research in the Sasquatch phenomenon, it's experiential. It's looking for commonalities more than anything else among a spectrum of experiences, good ones, indifferent ones, fleeting ones, long-term ones, like looking for those commonalities, that to research this thing from a scientific or a forensic mindset only takes us so far. That's the truth, because there's something a bit more to it. So when we go into saying things like, how can I flesh out what I'm talking about? Why are people seem to have continuous, and then what's the tagging phenomenon? So there are those that believe that when these beings have determined that they're going to interact, or at least show themselves to you, that somehow through some energy signature, they are marking you. So that when you are marked, supposedly, and this is not something that I either get behind or don't get behind, it's just a common theory.
Right. It's a theory. Right.
That once you are marked, it doesn't matter where you go. These entities seem to be able to pick up that energy signature that one of them has left within you or on you, so that maybe that gives you the opportunity to interact anywhere else, or they can just determine whether they want to interact with you, knowing that you, like, I believe this, once they know that you know, that kind of changes a little bit of the dynamic. That's been my experience. So, but that's the gist of what the tagging phenomenon is, and what that energy signature, mark, soul signature, maybe, who knows, is. I have no idea. I don't know the answer to that.
All right. So the time that you see this call it being, entity in the park, right?
Right.
Or the preserve.
Sure. Yeah.
Talk us through that. What did that
Yeah.
encounter?
So I'm up there.
How did it unfold?
So I would go out on my days off when I could, maybe once a week. And I would go out and I would check if I had left items on this, I called it that gifting rock at the time, right? And probably about 80% of the time they'd be taken, they'd be gone, whether it was apples or candy or powdered donuts or, whatever I had with me, that I would leave. And when I would go there, then I'd have my video camera on and I would just pan around the area, zoom in on, like I said, shadowy areas, things around the structures. And, because and this is common for many of us when we start to realize, when you start realizing the camera's starting to pick up things that you're not seeing with a naked eye. And then you realize there's all kinds of weirdness going on right in front of you. Like if you've been around this for any period of time, there's a whole legion of people that kind of get stuck in this kind of pigeonholed mindset of trying to take pictures and trying to timestamp. And it's a common part of the journey for many people. And because it blows your mind when you start to see these, for lack of a better term, cloaked entities. And it's not all just Sasquatch. There's a lot of other, I call them dimensionals or whatever that is, that's all around you that the camera is grabbing. When you start zooming in on this stuff and you realize, like, it's not pareidolia. Some of it always is because we're wired for that. But when you start seeing, nostril hairs and eyeballs and, teeth, like that's not just a random face appearing in some rock formation or, the way the leaves are configured against a tree. It's obviously something more, whatever that is, So that was what I would do because it was fascinating to me once you realize that you can do this. You know what I mean? I don't think it takes anybody with some specific, I've got a gift for it. No, you don't. It's all around you. You just have to have the wherewithal and an open enough mind to be able to look at it and then try and look at it critically, instead of trying to be dismissive of it, So that was what I was doing at that time. And I saw it, you know what I mean? So I've probably taken over the course of a year, 2 of those still frames when I was going back through my film of the same guy in a different place, but in the same general area, showing himself to me. If that's what he was doing, I mean, I like to think that's what it is. But again, it comes back to
do you have that? Do you still have that image?
I do. I'll send it to you.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like you found that image when you were going and time stamping.
Correct.
Right. So like you couldn't react to it in real time because you didn't see it in real time. Okay.
I didn't. I've had those real time encounters since, but not in New England. And I've had, everything about my Sasquatch journey has shifted massively in the last 7 years. So, but that at the time, that was when I was first getting started and, emulating others and having, kind of various degrees of success, like I said at the time, with trying to provoke responses and trading with them, leaving gifts and having things left or them just taking those things. That was without a doubt provoking a response, which is cool.
Okay. Then what? What's the next series of encounters?
I think, I won't say I got quiet with it. I'll talk about a few personal things because it'll give some context into my life. So, I've been in recovery from substance abuse for a long time, but back then I wasn't. And, I had to get clean again. And I started that process in the mid 2000s, like 2012, 2013. And it took a while for it to take hold. But it did. And the phenomenon actually, so I made friends online with a guy who was been a very successful researcher for a long time in Colorado. And then I looked at a lot of these other guys, and part of the inspiration for me to pull my head out of my proverbial rear end was that I realized that I was so passionate about this, and it was such a magical thing in my life that I had just been dismissive of for a good 7 or 8 years, and I thought there was no way that I could follow that calling and be involved in it in the state that I was in. It was such an inspiration for me to make some changes in life, And one of those changes was I had the opportunity to move to the Southwest, moved to Arizona. And I had some friends that I was in an online community with that was involved with this and many other topics that lived out here. And I'd never met them face to face, but I was, we talked frequently. And so I moved to Phoenix, right? And I hooked up with a man that lived outside the Phoenix area. And he was a big outdoorsman, big hunting enthusiast at the time, and a great, great Bigfoot researcher. And he had a group of guys that were all vets. All of them were vets that were as far down the road as a group and as individuals and I've been around this thing for a while, as anybody I had ever seen. And this man's name is Kevin Keeney. He's a great friend. And he brought me into the fold of a group that was collectively known as the Arizona Four. And I linked up with these guys in 2020, and it changed everything about how I approach this thing, the interactions and the experiences I've had. It's been just an unbelievable ride for the last basically 6 years, for sure. So, the first time I meet Kevin, he asked me if we're talking on the phone. He's like, would you like to come out? And so Kevin now lives in a town just north of Payson. I don't know how familiar you are with Arizona, but there is a...
No, but I'll ask enough questions to figure it out.
North central Arizona is not the desert cactus land of southern Arizona. It's mountainous, it's high elevation, and it's well forested. And Kevin lives below in the eaves of a huge geological phenomenon that occurs at the end of the Colorado shelf, which drops down from the real high plains to the mid-level plains. And it's an area known as the Mogollon Rim. And the Mogollon Rim stretches from basically the town that I now live in all the way across central Arizona to the New Mexico line into the White Mountains. And it is a vast, vast wilderness area. There's 3 national forests that converge there. There's Apache Stick Reeves, Coconino National Forest, and right below the Mogollon Rim is Tonto National Forest. And it's the largest deciduous ponderosa pine forest in the world. It is huge. And it has a Sasquatch lore and tradition that goes back for 1,000 years. I mean, this is Apache country this is where the last of the Apaches were. And the Apaches have some phenomenal lore and traditions regarding these guys. And then the locals that settled out here also, they have a name for it. It's called the Mogollon Monster. And it's basically a Sasquatch phenomenon tradition that's been here forever, and so this guy Kevin had stumbled onto some locations up on the Mogollon Rim, like way out in the wilderness, that were just otherworldly. And this is over 10 years ago, he started having a lot of encounters and experiences out there. And he had pulled in 3 other guys that were all local to the area. At the time, one of them was the fire chief of Payson, Arizona. I mean, these were guys that had a lot of cachet in their communities and a lot of credibility in their communities, but every one of them was a Sasquatch experiencer and had encounters out in this wilderness area, some of them for a long, long time. And they all kind of gravitated towards each other and started to go out. And they pulled me into that fold. And it changed everything. Like these guys had started out as kind of more traditional researchers, and they started to have more personal interactions with these entities up on the rim and started to have some of the way more paranormal aspects of the Sasquatch phenomenon manifesting regularly amongst them. And when they brought me into it, I got to start to witness some of this stuff that was just mind-blowing and life-altering for sure. So we can dive into all of that. That's how I ended up out here, and that's how I'm a member of this bunch.
Yeah, let's dive into your first encounter out there, maybe.
Will do. So I agree to meet with Kevin up on the Mogollon Rim, right? So at the time, I'm still coming up materially and in other ways, and I've got this like beat up little Saturn Vue, which barely qualified as an SUV, however, had enough ground clearance. So I meet up with Kevin on the very edge of the Mogollon Rim, which is this spectacular overview overlooking the forest and drops down. And it's the only place you can get phone signal, right? Because once you go retreat back north of there, up into the actual forest and the back trails, then you lose all signal. So I meet up with Kev, and we've known each other online for a few years, and we'd spoken on the phone. But it's the first time we'd ever met face to face. He's my age, Iraqi war vet, decorated, just a great, great guy. And so he takes me back to
what branch? What branch was he in?
He was Army.
What MOS? Like what infantry armor?
He was. Forces? I know he was a mechanic, but he was also a tank man. And because he was injured in Iraq, he was blown up off of a tank, and it really physically caused him a lot of problems. Purple Heart.
Okay, so he was like a
tank support. Yeah, but he's also a gunner too. So because he had a shell went off in front of this thing, probably 50 yards in front of him. He was on the turret, and he describes like spinning like a starfish, and 30 yards, 40 yards away from the shock of the detonation. So I haven't really. I don't know exactly what his. I mean, you'd have to ask him. You should have him on sometime because he's a great story unto it. So you can.
Yeah, well, it sounds like. Was he was enlisted then, right?
Oh yeah. Because his father was a colonel in the Guard, and his whole family had a military background and military history, for sure.
All right, I think they changed the designation, but he probably started as a 19 Delta.
Perhaps he'll watch this and correct me, so I have to be careful how I.
Well, look, I was an arm. What's that?
I said, this will be critiqued by all these guys in the Arizona 4 after this. They will let me know thumbs up or thumbs down.
I was it's complicated, but I was an armor officer. So I'm very familiar with the 120 millimeter smoothbore cannon and all that good stuff.
Right on, man.
Right? Turbine engine and all that. So
I am the only member of the Arizona 4 that was not in the military, so.
Okay. My audience is probably like, get to the point, stop talking. Right? The host is talking too much. So I'm just curious.
Kevin,
okay. So yeah,
Kevin takes me out, and I spend 4 days out. We've got multiple locations in Arizona, most of them up on the Mogollon Rim, some of them in the Sierra Anches. So he takes me up to at the time, a primary location, a place we call Hilltop, right? And, we had a lot of conversation, and I was never. So the Bigfoot community, to give you some context, there's 2 different camps in this thing, right? There's what we refer to as the apers, which are people that believe that this is some sort of lost North American ape, and all flesh and blood without any paranormal aspect to it at all, which is why we find bodies all the time and fossils. Right. It's not. I mean, we're not going to break that down. I am not in that camp, and I'm not going to just.
I'm not in that camp either because there's no physical evidence.
Some of the greatest researchers in the world started out in this thing. The first gen guys, they were all apers. You know what I mean? And it's obviously we progressed since there. And then there's the other side of the camp, which are the more of the paranormal and other believers in this, and more spiritual and whatever.
And I shouldn't like blithely just rule it out. Like that was probably not fair. But
you know what? Like
it's hard.
Honesty, if I were to give a personal opinion, the Aper narrative and the flesh and blood narrative, which used to be the predominant voice, if there was even allowed to have a voice in this thing, have been pretty much kicked to the curb, and that's the truth. Because even they know, even like some of the bigger Aper names that had TV shows and were fairly famous in this thing, and were the most dismissive, stamp out any other narrative but theirs, have started to come off of that, which is a good thing because there's not a lot of truth in the flesh and blood narratives, and that's just the reality of it. You know, you can't be around this thing for any period of time and not realize there's something else very, very odd going on around this thing. You know, so we get out there, and I spend 4 nights out on the Mogollon Rim with Kevin that changed my life. You know, I got to witness things that I had never even thought of before. The first night we're out, and so this is a strange one. So, and I've had this happen, but this is the first time this ever happened. I had suffered a fairly bad foot injury when I was in my late teens. And I walked with a limp for, most of my life. And so the first night that we're out, the first day that we're out, and I'm heading over to my little SUV, which I just beat the brakes off of trying to get it back to this place. And I was sleeping in the back of it. Like at this time, I didn't have any gear or whatever. And I go to pick up something out of the back to show Kevin. And all of a sudden, I get overcome with this wave of exhaustion. This is the first day that we're up there, right? And I said, Kev, I got to lay down. Excuse me, I'm really sorry. I got to put my head down for a few minutes. So I open up the back of the SUV and I lay down in the back cabin part and rack out. And I'm out, man. And I don't nap. And that was really strange. So I get up probably 2.5, 3 hours later. And Kevin's like, well, he had a gift stump back in those days. He said, let's go leave something. And we left something. Let's go see if they took anything, whatever it is. So we're walking out there. And then Kevin notices, how come you're not walking with a limp? But he had met me and I'm walking with a limp. And so whatever, I had no pain in my foot, whatever had caused that had stopped. That was really strange. And I don't know at the time that I attributed it to something with this, but it's never come back. And I run 3 miles 5 days a week. And that's something I could never have done back then. You know what I mean? And that was, a long time ago. So that was something strange. And then that night, so Kevin had been up at this location for a good probably 7 years, right? And he'd started to have personal interaction with whatever these guys were. You know what I mean? Most of it was more in I hate to use that term cloaked, but in that state, with an occasional visual as well. But it was common and it was recurring with him. And the first night we're out and we're sitting and the guys do everything in the dark, right? I think there was a full moon this night, but no, there wasn't. It was a new moon because there was something else that happened and your eyes are acclimating. And then Kevin says, do you see that? And I'm looking around and I'm not easily open to suggestive ideas, right? I mean, so I'm looking at especially this night, I'm looking at everything with this huge, I don't go in there with saying, oh, I want to see something. I want to believe. I am very critical minded, always have been. And I start to see these figures that are almost kind of, you hear about the predator effect type thing, right? That's what it looked like, but it was more shimmery. It started off all around us. And now we're up in the Mogollon, and this is April or, late April, early May. And there's no fireflies up there. That's not something that's there. And I start to see these, we call them twinkle lights, they look like little LED lights that just start popping off, right? And many times they're red, and greens, and blues, and whites. And so this starts happening, and it's not my eyes playing tricks with me. They're prominent enough so that you can rule out whatever, some miasma in your vision, and this starts happening. And later times we've come to realize I don't know what this sort of electrical discharge is, but it seems to manifest when these guys are around. And you can go down a million different rabbit holes with that, but this is the end game, what happens. And that starts to happen, and he's pointing it out to me, and I'm seeing it, right? And I'd never seen this before, never. And then at one point, we're surrounded in a semicircle around our camp chairs of these figures, right? And I'm witnessing them and I'm seeing them, and then they have a vaguely large humanoid outline, but it's distorted. And it took me a long time after this trip to accept that's what I was seeing, because I am looking for every possible reason why I didn't witness what I was witnessing. And so that happens. And there's so many weird things happen on this trip. So we walk back out that trail to that stump in the pitch black, and Kevin's got a little infrared flashlight so that it's really low density light, but it's enough to get down the trail. So we go out and we're walking back to where we're camped, and it's probably about 800 yards between areas, and it's pitch black out because it was a new moon. That's how I remember this. And all of a sudden, you'll like this. This is probably where we are less than 20 miles as the crow flies from where Travis Walton had his abduction story. We're there. That's where the Mogollon Rim is. That's where this guy's. And I was familiar with that story. These guys.
I did not know that. I did not know that this is where. Okay,
yeah, so
that's helpful.
Talk about some lateral, interesting things about where we're at. That's one of them. And I didn't know that till Kevin told me that, but I knew the story. You know what I mean? So we're walking, and probably about 500 yards in front of us in the forest to the right, it looked like all of a sudden we're walking forward, and all of a sudden it looked like somebody had switched on stadium lights, right? And like the entire, it wasn't where we were, but it was in front of us. The entire forest lit up like it was high noon. And there was no helicopter with a searchlight above us. There's not another soul within a 30-mile, maybe 40-mile radius specifically of where we are. We are out there, you know, and there's no discernible reason why this is happening, right? And so I look over at Kevin and I'm like, come on, dude, what is that, right? And he's like, I have absolutely no idea. That's a new one for me. We probably got another 200 yards up the trail, and it's also somebody went like switch, and it just went pitch black again. You know what I mean? So that's a lateral, strange thing that happened on that first trip up there. So, and this type of oddness went on for the next 3 nights after that, where we would be surrounded by these guys, or maybe less or a few more of them, whatever. And then I got probably my first ever communication, and I was told to go to sleep. Just those words, go to sleep. And that was like this third night we were out, and I just went in the back of my truck and I went to sleep, you know? And then that type of dialogue over the course of the next 5 years started to occur with more frequency. And it wasn't just for me, it was for all of us. And we would vet it too. Like, when that type of stuff starts to happen to you, it's subjective and it's unnerving. And we would start to do things like we would all hear a message, but not out loud. And we would write down what we heard and match it up with each other, and it would be identical. Or we'd do a 3 count and we would say, what did you just hear? And we'd all be saying the exact same thing. So there was
was it audible, or was it just in your head?
It was mental. I've had audible things said to me, but this was what's referred to in the cryptid community as mind speak, which is, I don't know how telepathy became that in just this specific genre. Same principle. It's nuts, dude. Like, literally, do
you see images, or is it kind of just hear
both? But for the most part, It's manifested for me as another entity's voice speaking directly into my head. I've also had visual impressions, but that hasn't happened frequently. This other thing has happened with way more frequency. So it wasn't long after that trip, that this started to manifest when we were out. And at one point, and back in those days, Sean, like, I still didn't go anywhere without a camera and without taking video and documenting where I was, what was going on. And Kevin had all the audio tech too, you know, and he has some of the most phenomenal audio ever, you know, like literally ever, like as on the same level as the Sierra Sounds with Ron Moorhead. It's that good. And we got basically asked point blank to put the tech down, to put it away. And it was a hard choice because I was still very much into visual documentation. You know what I mean? Because I think it was still important for me to prove something. You know what I mean? And that has shifted massively in the last 40 years. Like, I don't really care that much about proving anything to anyone anymore. However, back in those days, to have that type of visual backup seemed really important. You know what I mean? And so we put the audio tech down. We stopped filming with intent. And when we did that, the nature of our encounters and experiences and some of the communication, it changed exponentially. It got more personal, more frequent, and it changed the way how we look at all of this thing. You know, the days of us, like I said, trying to provide evidence and proof for other people, that ship has sailed. I just don't care about that anymore. Like, the immersion of the experience has taken way more of a front seat than being a Sasquatch researcher at this point, but it wasn't always like that. That's kind of where we are now, and we've had, some incredible things happen as a result. I have like the highlight of my Bigfoot career happened in July of 21, and it changed my life. Also retired me. It also gave me this incredible life too. And it was Bigfoot related for sure.
Let's stop right there.
Yep.
And use that as a launch point in the next episode. Any
Perfect.
final words for the audience for this episode before we go into that?
I'm really grateful. I wasn't quite sure how Sean even knew who I was. And he said, somebody from the audience sent me your name and an email. And that's how we linked up. So thank you. I try and use a lot of discernment when I go public with any of this stuff, because I wasn't for a long time. I was quite the opposite. And so I just got a good vibe off this thing. And I'm really grateful that you guys are paying attention and that I have the opportunity to sit down with Sean and do this. So thanks, guys. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Chris. And I'm actually, the audience is going to be extremely angry with me that I edited this point, because I only have to end this episode. And then we start talking again. I get to find out what happens very quickly. But not my audience. They're going to have to wait 2 days. So anyway, I apologize in advance. I'm sorry, but Hey,
bro, this is your gig, man. I can invest as much time as you need to do this the right way. I don't care. I didn't know if you even wanted to, crack that story open yet. I'm just looking for ways to segue into some other part of conversation when we're talking,
Oh yeah, well, just really quick for the audience, we were kind of deciding, okay, we're going to do 2 episodes. What should we talk about? And we're kind of maybe this or that. And we're like, well, we'll just figure it out. And then Chris says, so there's 2 types of interviewers typically: someone with a list of questions, and then somebody who's kind of, for lack of a better word, all over the place. And I said, well, we'll kind of be all over the place, but it'll be a focused all over the place. And then I think that's accurate, right? I mean, that's what I think.
The best way to do it, man. You take it where the conversation goes. To me, it's always been the most organic way to do this, man.
Yeah. Otherwise, the interviewer's not listening.
Right.
They're just reading a list, right?
I find a lot of the listed interviewers often have an agenda too, and they're trying to direct outcomes. You know what I mean? And I'll run from that.
Yeah, well, there's a whole other, we could talk about that offline. There's a whole other thing going on there.
Oh, yeah.
So, all right, my friend, absolutely appreciate your time and can't wait for the next episode.
Thanks pleasure.
Again.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and you can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of a expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's two options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site. And there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much and keep watching. I really appreciate it.